Chapter 4. One day later, the ruins of the old city receded behind me as I traversed the wasteland, my heart still racing from the events in the underground chamber. The weight of the stolen fruits against my hip was a constant reminder of the risks I had taken. Yet the toxic air that usually burned my lungs seemed less oppressive, perhaps a lingering effect of the fruit I had consumed. Jagged metal and crumbling concrete littered my path. Every step demanded caution to avoid twisting an ankle or slicing open my boots on the sharp debris. The sun, a sickly orb barely visible through the perpetual haze, cast long, distorted shadows across the desolate landscape. The events of the past hours replayed in my mind, a loop of fragmented memories. The new people with their golden skin and luminous eyes, the glowing tree laden with pulsing fruit, and the miraculous healing I had experienced all felt like a fever dream. Yet the tingling sensation in my newly healed wounds and the unfamiliar energy coursing through my veins were undeniable proof that it had all been real. A movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. A pack of mutated creatures huddled over a carcass about 50 yards to my left. They might have once been dogs, but radiation and time had twisted them into grotesque forms. Multiple eyes swiveled in my direction, assessing me as a potential threat.
Lucky for both of us,
I muttered, giving them a wide berth. Their matted fur was patchy, revealing skin covered in oozing sores. Elongated snouts filled with needle-sharp teeth snapped and snarled as they fought over their meal. The stench of decay and unwashed animal reached me even from this distance, mixing with the ever-present metallic tang in the air. Cresting a small hill, I paused to catch my breath. The familiar sight of the trash heap sprawled out before me, a grotesque monument to a civilization long gone, brought a sense of relief. Massive piles of discarded remnants from the old world stretched as far as the eye could see, forming an ever-shifting labyrinth of twisted metal, shattered plastics, and unidentifiable masses of decaying matter. Despite their ugliness, the sight filled me with relief. I was close to home, close to Mother. The maze of makeshift dwellings constructed from the detritus of the old world began to take shape as I drew nearer. Plumes of acrid smoke rose from scattered fires where other scavengers cooked their meager meals or burned trash for warmth. The air grew thicker, a pungent mixture of chemical fumes, rotting garbage, and the unmistakable odor of unwashed bodies. Skeletal figures moved between the dwellings, their eyes hollow and wary. Some nodded in recognition as I passed, while others clutched their meager possessions closer, eyeing my satchel with poorly disguised interest. Finally, I stood before our shelter, a patchwork structure of corrugated metal, synthetic fabrics, and scavenged materials that somehow managed to stand against the harsh elements. The faded blue tarp that served as our roof fluttered weakly in the toxic breeze. A strand of rusted cans hung by the entrance, our makeshift alarm system.
Home sweet home,
I whispered, a mixture of irony and genuine affection in my voice. Taking a deep breath, I pushed aside the heavy material that served as our door. The familiar musty scent of our living space washed over me, mingled with the herbal aroma of medicinal concoctions. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dim interior, the only light filtering through small gaps in the walls. As my vision cleared, I saw Mother rise swiftly from her resting place. Her movements were fluid, almost predatory, despite her weakened state. The kitchen knife clutched in her hand glinted dully in the low light, her iridescent eyes, unnaturally large and luminous, fixed on me with an intensity that never failed to unsettle me.
Mother, it's me,
I said quickly, raising my hands to show I was unarmed. Recognition flashed in Mother's eyes, and the tension in her posture eased slightly. The knife lowered, but she didn't release her grip. Her skin, usually pale with a faint luminescence, looked ashen in the dim light of our shelter.
Darius offspring,
she said, her voice a mixture of relief and concern.
Your return was significantly delayed. Explain.
I set my satchel down carefully, acutely aware of its precious contents. The fruits inside seemed to pulse with a faint energy, detectable even through the thick fabric. The air in our small shelter felt charged, as if the fruit's presence had altered the very atmosphere.
I apologize for worrying you, Mother,
I replied, choosing my words carefully.
My scavenging took me further than intended.
Mother's eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing. The iridescent quality of her irises seemed more pronounced, swirling with colors I had no names for. She took a step closer, her movements graceful despite her illness.
Elaborate on your activities.
She demanded, her tone leaving no room for evasion. Taking a deep breath, I began to recount my journey into the old city ruins. The acrid smell of the wasteland clung to my clothes, mixing with the familiar sense of our home. As I spoke, I carefully omitted the details about the new people, focusing instead on the discovery of the underground chamber and the strange, glowing tree. Mother moved closer, her eyes roving over me with an intensity that made me squirm. Her slender fingers, cool to the touch, probed the newly healed wounds on my hands and arms. The contrast between her cool skin and the lingering warmth from the fruit's effects was startling.
These injuries.
She said, her tone sharp.
Recent acquisition, yet advanced healing evident. Explain.
I swallowed hard, knowing I couldn't hide the truth from her keen senses. The taste of the fruit lingered on my tongue, a reminder of the risk I had taken.
The fruit, Mother.
I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper.
It has properties, healing properties. I consumed one to ensure its safety before bringing it to you.
Mother's eyes widened, a rare display of surprise on her usually composed face. The subtle shimmer beneath her skin intensified momentarily, a physical manifestation of her emotional state.
Consumption of unknown substances is extremely high risk, she stated, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Your actions were reckless.
I know,
I said, dropping my gaze to the dirt floor of our shelter. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it.
But Mother, you're getting worse. The medicines we've been using aren't working. I had to try something.
A tense silence filled the small space of our shelter. I could feel Mother's gaze on me, assessing, calculating. The only sound was the faint rustle of the tarp roof in the toxic wind outside. Finally, she spoke.
Show me this fruit.
With trembling hands, I reached into my satchel and withdrew one of the glowing purple fruits. Its soft light illuminated Mother's face, casting strange shadows that emphasized her elven-like features. The sharp angles of her cheekbones seemed more pronounced in this otherworldly glow. Mother took the fruit delicately, turning it over in her hands. Her long, slender fingers traced the intricate patterns on its skin. She brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. Her eyes closed for a moment, and a look of concentration passed over her face.
The scent is familiar,
She murmured, almost to herself.
reminiscent of...
She trailed off, her eyes distant, as if lost in a memory. Then, with a slight shake of her head, she refocused on me. The fruit's glow reflected in her eyes, creating an unsettling effect.
Your assessment of its healing properties appears accurate.
She stated, her tone clinical, but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify.
We will proceed with caution.
Mother's decision to try the fruit filled me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. I watched intently as she used the kitchen knife to carefully slice open the purple skin. The blade, worn from years of use, parted the fruit's flesh with surprising ease. The fruit's inner glow intensified as it was exposed to the air, casting a surreal light throughout our dim shelter.
Mother,
I said, my voice tight with concern.
perhaps I should prepare it for you.
She shook her head, her silver hair catching the fruit's light in an otherworldly shimmer.
Negative. Direct interaction necessary for full assessment.
I nodded, knowing better than to argue. Instead, I busied myself preparing one of our few clay cups, positioning it to catch the fruit's glowing juice as Mother expertly manipulated the knife. The cup, chipped and stained from years of use, seemed an incongruously mundane vessel for such a miraculous substance. The sweet alien scent of the fruit filled our small space, more intense than I remembered from the underground chamber. It mingled with the usual odors of our shelter, the musty smell of our bedding, the sharp tang of Mother's medicinal herbs, and the ever-present metallic scent of the wasteland that seeped through our walls. Mother's nostrils flared slightly, her eyes narrowing in concentration. The subtle glow beneath her skin seemed to pulse in response to the fruit's presence.
Composition complex.
She murmured, her voice barely audible.
Detecting elements similar to, but altered. Intriguing.
Once the cup was full of the luminescent liquid, Mother raised it to her lips. She paused, her iridescent eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I saw a flicker of something I rarely witnessed in her: uncertainty.
Darius offspring, your concern is noted.
She said, her tone softening slightly.
However, this action is necessary. Observe carefully. Report any anomalies.
With that, she tilted the cup back and drank deeply. The glowing liquid disappeared down her throat, leaving a faint luminous trail on her lips. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Mother stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The silence in our shelter was absolute, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind outside. Then, gradually, I noticed a change. The sickly pallor that had haunted her skin for so long began to fade, replaced by a subtle, healthy glow. The hollows in her cheeks filled out slightly, and the dark circles under her eyes lightened. Mother's eyes snapped open, glowing more brightly than I had seen in years. The colors in her irises swirled and shifted like oil on water.
Fascinating.
She breathed, her voice stronger than it had been in months.
The cellular response is unexpected. Accelerated healing detected. Also, something more. Something familiar.
Encouraged by these positive signs, I quickly moved to prepare the rest of the fruit. Using our crude utensils, I mashed the remaining pulp into a fine paste, remembering how the new people had administered it to their sick companion.
Mother,
I said, offering her the bowl of mashed fruit.
I think you should eat this too. It might help even more.
She nodded, accepting the bowl. This time, she didn't hesitate, consuming the paste with an eagerness that surprised me. As she ate, I could almost see the vitality returning to her body. The subtle shimmer beneath her skin intensified, becoming more pronounced than I had seen in years. When she finished, Mother looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of wonder and something that might have been fear. Her face, usually composed and inscrutable, was alive with emotion.
The effects are significant.
She said softly, her voice trembling slightly.
I remember.
She trailed off, her gaze turning inward. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, hoping she might finally share some of the secrets of her past. But the moment passed, and she refocused on me, her expression once again controlled.
You were correct, Darius offspring.
She said, her voice stronger than it had been in months.
This fruit possesses remarkable properties. We must use it judiciously.
The next morning I woke early, my mind already racing with plans. Pale, toxic light filtered through the gaps in our shelter's walls, casting sickly patterns on the dirt floor. Mother was still sleeping, her breathing easier than it had been in months. The subtle glow beneath her skin seemed more pronounced, a reassuring sign of the fruit's ongoing effects. Carefully, so as not to wake her, I prepared for my trip to the market. From the bottom of my satchel, I retrieved the discarded scraps of fruit skin from the new people's ritual. These fragments still pulsed with a faint luminescence, their sweet alien scent barely detectable. I reasoned these would be enough to gauge interest without risking our entire supply.
I'm heading to the market,
I whispered to Mother, knowing her keen senses would pick up my words even in sleep.
I won't be long.
The market was already bustling when I arrived, a chaotic assemblage of makeshift stalls and desperate traders. The air was thick with the mingled scents of unwashed bodies, questionable food items, and the ever-present chemical tang of the wasteland. Shouts and haggling voices created a cacophony that assaulted my ears after the relative quiet of our shelter. I made my way to a familiar stall, one I'd often visited for medicines in the past. The vendor, an older man named Grim, eyed me curiously as I approached. His face, mapped by the harsh realities of our world, was a patchwork of scars and radiation burns. One milky eye stared sightlessly, while the other fixed on me with sharp interest.
Well, if it ain't young Darius,
he said, his voice gruff but not unkind.
What brings you here so early?
I pulled out the wrapped fruit scraps, trying to keep my movements casual. The market was no place to show weakness or excitement.
I found something interesting. Thought you might want to take a look.
Grim's good eye widened as I revealed the glowing purple fragments. He leaned in close, his gnarled hands hovering over the scraps as if afraid to touch them. The scent of cheap alcohol and stale sweat rolled off him in waves.
By the wastelands,
he breathed, his voice barely audible over the market's din. Is this what I think it is? I shrugged, feigning ignorance.
I'm not sure. What do you think it is?
Grim glanced around furtively before lowering his voice further. His breath was hot against my ear as he spoke.
this looks like radiant fruit, Stuff that grows in the most radioactive hot zones. Impossible to get unless you've got a death wish or a top-of-the-line radiation suit.
My heart raced at this information, blood pounding in my ears. So the underground chamber must have been highly radioactive. How had I survived unprotected? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the matter at hand.
Is it valuable?
I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Grim nodded slowly, his good eye never leaving the glowing fragments.
Oh yes, very valuable and very rare. I'll give you 100 credits for these scraps.
I struggled to keep my face neutral, even as my mind reeled at the amount. It was more than I typically made in half a year of scavenging. The credits could buy medicine, food, maybe even passage to a safer settlement.
Deal,
I said quickly, before he could reconsider. As we made the exchange, Grim fixed me with a penetrating stare. His good eyes seemed to bore into me, searching for answers.
Where did you find this boy?
I swallowed hard, sticking to the story I'd prepared. The lie felt thick on my tongue.
In one of the trash heaps. Must have been discarded by someone from inside the city walls.
Grim nodded, though I could see skepticism in his eye.
Well, you're one lucky scavenger. If you find anything like this again, you come straight to me, understand? I'll always give you the best price.
I nodded, already backing away from the stall. The weight of the credits in my pocket felt both comforting and dangerous.
Of course, thank you.
As I made my way home, my mind buzzed with the implications of what I'd learned. The fruit was clearly more valuable than I'd imagined. But with that value came risk. If others learned of our supply, I shook off the thought as I approached our shelter. For now, we had resources we'd never dreamed of. It was a start, a chance for something better. Yet as I pushed aside the fabric door, a nagging sense of unease settled in my stomach. In the wasteland, nothing came without a price. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine scavenging and quiet moments with Mother. Her improved condition filled me with cautious optimism. The sickly pallor of her skin had given way to a healthier glow, and her movements were more fluid, less pained. As evening approached, I decided to make one last scavenging run before dark.
I won't go far,
I assured Mother as I prepared to leave. The familiar weight of my scavenging bag settled on my shoulder, the tools inside clinking softly.
And I won't go near the old city.
She fixed me with her penetrating gaze, a hint of worry in her iridescent eyes. The colors swirled more vibrantly than they had in years, a testament to the fruit's effects.
Exercise extreme caution, Darius offspring. Recent events may have drawn unwanted attention.
I nodded, touched by her concern.
I will, Mother. I'll be back soon.
The scavenging proved mostly fruitless. I found a few small items that might fetch a credit or two, but nothing significant. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in sickly hues of orange and green, I turned back towards home. The toxic wind picked up, carrying the acrid scent of decay and chemicals. The first sign that something was wrong was the door. Our makeshift entrance, usually secured with care, hung askew, nearly torn from its hinges. Dark stains that could only be blood marred the threshold, still wet and glistening in the fading light. My heart leapt into my throat, beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs.
No,
I whispered, breaking into a run.
No, no, no.
I burst into our shelter, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim interior. The familiar sense of home were overwhelmed by the metallic tang of blood and something else. The sharp, ozone smell of energy weapons.
Mother!
I called out, my voice cracking with fear.
Mother, where are you?
Silence answered me. As my vision cleared, the scene before me came into horrifying focus. Blood spattered the floor and walls, dark and viscous in the low light. Our few possessions lay scattered and broken, shards of clay and twisted metal crunching under my feet. And there, in the center of it all, lay Mother. I stumbled towards her, my legs suddenly weak. She was sprawled on her back, one hand still clutching the kitchen knife we'd used to prepare the fruit. Her chest. I choked back a sob as I saw the blackened, charred hole where a laser blast had struck her. The smell of burned flesh filled my nostrils, making me gag.
Mother,
I whispered, falling to my knees beside her. Her eyes, those beautiful alien eyes that had always watched over me, stared lifelessly at the ceiling. The vibrant, swirling colors that had danced within them were now dull and fixed, a stark contrast to the life they once held. With trembling hands, I reached out to close her eyes. Her skin, once warm to the touch and faintly glowing, was now cold and lifeless. The subtle shimmer that had always been a part of her was gone. leaving her looking hauntingly ordinary in death. I cradled Mother's body, my mind numb with disbelief and overwhelming grief. Questions churned in my thoughts, battling with the crushing sorrow that threatened to consume me. Who had done this? Why? Had it been because of the fruit? Or was it something else entirely? As the initial shock began to ebb, a new emotion surged within me, anger. It burned hot and fierce, pushing aside the grief and replacing it with a need for answers, for justice. Someone had taken Mother from me, and I would find out who. They would pay for what they had done. With a heavy heart, I laid Mother's body down gently. There would be time to mourn her properly later, but for now, I needed to think clearly. Whoever had attacked our home might return, and I couldn't afford to be here when they did. I moved quickly, gathering what few supplies remained. The precious fruits I had brought back were gone, likely stolen by whoever had killed Mother. I stuffed the credits from the market and any small, valuable items I could find into my bag. As I prepared to leave, my eyes fell on Mother's knife, still clutched in her lifeless hand. Swallowing hard, I pried the knife from her fingers. The blade was slick with blood, evidence that she had fought back, that she hadn't gone down without a fight.
I'll make this right, Mother.
I whispered, my voice thick with emotion.
I promise.
With one last lingering look at the only home I had ever known and at the woman who had been my entire world, I slipped out into the gathering darkness of the wasteland. The toxic wind howled around me, carrying the stench of death and decay. But beneath it all, I caught a faint sweet scent, the lingering trace of the radiant fruit. As I disappeared into the night, I knew that whatever answers lay ahead, they were tied to that miraculous, dangerous discovery. And I would not rest until I had uncovered the truth and avenged the only family I had ever known.
Bold heart keep rising through the dark, through the fight.